Hmm.
Rudra, can you hear me, Rudra?
Hello?
Yes, sir.
I am here.
Rudra. Please start. Huh?
You've changed.
Dear Excellencies, distinguished guests,
I drive,
ladies and
fellow?
gentlemen from social media, Facebook Live and YouTube Live. This is Rudranarayan Das, Executive Director, Center for Adivasi Research and Development. Welcomes you all to this global digital platform of intellectual gathering of World Human Sciences and Management Conference 2021. Organized by Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Odisha, in association with Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, and Central University of Odisha, Koraput, and Ravenshaw University, Cuttack. The broader theme of this conference is ethnological context, disciplinary practices of social sciences, and policy frames. On behalf of CARD, I extend my profound gratitude to Professor Mahadev Jaiswal, Director, Indian Institute of Management, Professor Sarath Kumar Palita, Vice Chancellor, Central University of Odisha, and Professor Sanjay Kumar Naik, Vice Chancellor, Ravenshaw University. The convener of this largest virtual conference are eminent Indian historian, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda, and eminent policy activist, writer, and philanthropist, Mr. Charudat Panigrahiji. Friends, in this evening, we have with us a very eminent personality of this planet, is none other than Professor Norris Krueger. Here I quote to Professor Bryce Solon. He talked about Professor Norris, is that there are not many individuals like Norris Krueger. Norris is one of those sparkling people that are a fountain of knowledge, innovation, ideas, and observation. And insights that are a rule unique to Norris. He's one of those visionaries that leave the rest of us better off. So Dr. Norris grew up in a small town of Marysville, Ohio, then headed to Caltech to study physics, but found a calling in social science. Ultimately, he got an honors degree at Ohio State University, and later on, one of the very first PhDs in entrepreneurship with an investment banking job and entrepreneurial venture in between. From Columbus, he headed west again to Montana for his first assistant professor job. He went from that to another startup and consulting and writing several highly cited articles before returning to academia. As an assistant professor at Boise State University for 7 years and founder director of teams and entrepreneurship program that earned 6 national and 2 global best practice awards, including SBA and Kaufman Foundation. Teams blended project based learning with community outreach with the motto he promoted that students are our secret weapon. He is active in both the entrepreneurial and economic development world and in academia. Professor Norris Krueger is an entrepreneurial ecosystem builder and global champion at Kaufman ESHIP program. He is also a senior research fellow at the Center for Management and Entrepreneurship School of Advanced Studies, Marysville, Ohio. In today's webinar, Professor Norris Krueger will deliver his talk on myths and misconceptions about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship, an agenda for research and practice. Now, without taking much time, I would like to invite Professor Norris Krueger to initiate his talk. Over to you, Dr. Norris.
Thank you. For once, I'm not muted. I'm that guy on the call that never knows whether he's muted or not. I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to. I'm less interested in this talk than in the conversations we're going to have down the road. I think if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we are all in this together. You know, if being an entrepreneur has taught me anything, it's that we're all in this together. And it's something that we all could do better at, but I have found if there is a blessing to COVID, it's how many great new people that I'm meeting. And this is an example of that. Let me let me share my screen. That I want to make sure. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's okay. Can you see that the deck has changed?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. That sometimes the Zoom or Teams does crazy some crazy things. Anyway, that my hair is a bit longer than it was there. I sort of part of my attempting to liberate myself during the pandemic. But if there's one thing that is a bane to my existence and to my friends and colleagues, whether they be ecosystem builders or scholars or educators, is that there is so much about the reality of entrepreneurship that people get wrong, that there are myths and misconceptions out there. So I think it's important and these myths are hard to dispel. These misconceptions are often very, very entrenched, even among the best educators, the best scholars, and the best practitioners. But to me, one of the ways to move forward is to start talking about what are really the most important questions. There are several areas where these bigger questions are a tremendous opportunity for practice, and they're a tremendous opportunity for scholarship. Absolutely amazing what I think what we can do. But let me set the stage here. That that in the year 1900, the world's smartest guy, David Hilbert, world's #1 mathematician, and he and his mathematician buddies first asked the question, is the field of mathematics growing or just getting bigger? What that means is more and more people are studying and publishing in mathematics, but is the field really moving forward? So what they did is they sat down and figured out 20+ questions that if we solve any of these, it moves the field forward. In fact, even if we just try to solve them, the field moves forward. So we want to be, one of the things I want you to be thinking about is not just what I suggest, but what you see is happening. Let's flash forward. My distinguished host mentioned my days at Caltech. First lecture I ever went to, the first talk, was by the famous Nobel laureate physicist Richard Feynman, world's smartest guy, arguably. And he was talking about how to do great research. He says it's good to have money, it's good to have skills and methodological expertise, but it really boiled down to great questions. Everyone can come up with good questions. What you have to do are great questions. And fundamentally, is it something that will advance the field? Does it matter to people, to other people, to your colleagues, and others? Who does it matter to? And it needs to matter to yourself. So whatever questions we talk about, ultimately it's about you. If this were a live audience, I would start by asking as many people as possible in the audience, what is your big burning question about entrepreneurship? Whether it's about education, whether it's about theory, is it about empirical research? What is your big burning question? Now, I'm going to just I'm going to touch on a variety of things, because this is obviously a very broad topic, but the things that speak to me, the things that get me excited. And it's timing is perfect. Again, the pandemic, if there's a blessing to it, that it's forced us in business and elsewhere to rethink the deep assumptions we've made around our enterprise, our deepest assumptions about research, the deepest assumptions about education, our deepest assumptions about practice. And it's been enlightening in the way that great science moves forward. It's painful having to throw away, some of your most cherished, long-held beliefs, because they're not right. The world has changed. Maybe they were never right. For example, it's not hard to see supply chain problems that COVID has induced. And we're telling the entrepreneurs, you have to rethink your supply chains. And what companies that I talk to, every one of them says, well, yes, the pandemic showed our supply chain is vulnerable. But the scary thing is it's been vulnerable for 5 or 10 years. We just didn't know it. So it's uncovering some interesting. I think the same is true with research and education. I don't know the mix of the audience, how many of you are in the policy arena, how many are practitioners, and how many are scholars and educators. But I want to make a call to all of you that this is a huge opportunity for us to share with each other and help each other move forward on it. So if you're ready to begin to start diving in, let's do this. It's the obligatory, okay, who's this Norris guy? You can look me up. I'm having achieved things just tells you how much more there is to get done. So it's time for that great rethink. Again, if this were a live audience, one of the things, obnoxious things that I do that usually gets a laugh is that I ask, well, let's start at a very basic assumption. Let's do start with linguistics. Is entrepreneur a noun or a verb? And they all raise their hands and go, it's a noun. And I said, no, it's a verb. They're like, what? Like what? It's because it's a bit of a joke, but entrepreneur and entrepreneurship and innovation, these are all, they don't happen without action, often bold action. That, now, I was in Athens, Greece a few years ago, and the students, young people said, no, they said entrepreneur was a verb because their slang word for entrepreneur was really a gerund. It was entrepreneuring. I thought, oh, that was nice. What I loved was if you change the Greek letters to English letters, to Roman letters, it spells, the word epitero spells epic hero. I thought that was just a real hoot. And if I ever have a coat of arms or something like that, I think I will have it on there. But there are 5 areas that I want to talk about today. And I welcome your feedback. I welcome your comments. If you're on Zoom, feel free to leave a question in the chat. And I certainly would love to, if you have my contact info, please feel free to reach out to me. Okay, well, what do we need to rethink? What are the most, for me, the burning questions, that Feynman question, that Hail Mary questions, that ultimately where we're going to find those? And one is, we talk all the time about the entrepreneurial mindset, and it's really important, and we never really define it beyond, oh, you need to think like an entrepreneur, and that's great, but how do you measure it? How do you understand it at a deep level that we can intelligently nurture that? And that leads to entrepreneurial learning. That it is frightening to realize how many studies are being done of the impact of entrepreneurial education that have very little theory, poor research design, and then they can't figure out why the research doesn't replicate. And I'm sure it drives the policymakers crazy to see these wonderful studies that don't have any grounding in theory. Some of them don't even have any, and they have really no grounding in education. I live in a country where the average management professor is basically proud that he or she has never had 1 hour of training as an educator. They haven't studied how humans learn. So in these first two things, that the theory side is wide open for people to do great research. So we'll touch on that a little bit later. And if we are trying to understand impact, assessment matters. There's a big global research project spinning up as we speak. I have a meeting, in fact, a meeting on that later today to help push this forward. But that one thing that I think we have a golden opportunity. If you are an educator or a trainer of entrepreneurs, you can measure your impact in theoretically sound, empirically rigorous fashion that is going to tell you where and where you aren't moving the needle on that. And I think in a lot of ways that's very exciting because it has direct policy implications. Now, most programs don't want to know how well they're doing because they're scared that they're not moving the needle. And that's a project that I did with the EU and OECD called EPIC that I will circle back to shortly. Is a great tool because it's developmental. We can all get better at this stuff. And I like to think I'm pretty good at these things, and I know how much more I need to know, how much I need to learn. And spoiler alert, it's talking with people like you that help move that. This is all kind of on the micro side. The macro side, the entrepreneurial ecosystem, the same thing. We talk about it, we sing its praises, and we rarely define it rigorously. And we talk about ecosystems or innovation systems, and the practitioners look at us like, what is wrong with you? They're like, that does not resonate with what they're experiencing in the field. I found, working with the Kauffman Foundation's great eShip program, which is a huge effort to promote the field of building ecosystems, building entrepreneurial ecosystems as a profession. That this bottom up, led by the voice of the entrepreneurs, focusing on networks instead of institutions, really does work. But it runs contrary to what most academics focus on. For instance, there's a thing called the triple helix you may have heard of. All you need to have is academe, business groups, and government. Put them in the same room and magic happens. Entrepreneurs happen, innovation happens. And we know that it's absurd on the face of it, but it's very convenient for analysis, and at least there's some theory there. But if you want to communicate with the people on the ground, people working on policy in your own communities, this is a place to start. And there's huge since a lot of you are doing research scholarship, huge opportunities for research, and they get published in good journals, and I mean good journals, if you embrace this perspective. And I always like to sort of tweak my audience by talking about methodology, that there are so many methodological tools out there that we do not use, that are sound, powerful tools. Like I say, this is why the economists make fun of management scholars, that we don't know how to do math. I'm an old math major, so I see that in ways that can be very powerful for us. And there's one tool in particular I would love to get you excited about that'll help us move forward. So rethinking mindset, there's a lot that people are still debating, or opportunities discovered or they created. I'm very much on the created side, that we identify opportunities to take action. And they're not just laying in the street. We are part of that discussion, that it's not an opportunity unless it's an opportunity for you. That for those of you who know me, I spent much of my career focused heavily on entrepreneurial intentions. It's been very exciting, very interesting. It turns out to be a useful tool. There are great theoretically sound models out there that we can apply. The nagging thing that kept poking at my head was, it's not enough. And realizing we have to go deep. We have to go deeper into how humans think. And that has taken me to a very deep dive into neuroscience. Apparently, I coined the word neuro-entrepreneurship. I'm not sure that's a good thing. It's so easy to put neuro in front of, well, anything. We have neuroethics, we have I suspect neuro-automobile repair. But nonetheless, there is incredible theory. There's a lot of evidence that tells what anchors our deep beliefs that underlie what entrepreneurial thinking. That the mindset is, in cognitive science terms, the word mindset refers to this collection of deep beliefs that we're typically not aware of, that we're not mindful of, but are nonetheless driving all our decision making. So one of the things is I'd suggest, if this interests you, that's something to take a look at. There are a lot of interesting resources in the management scholarship world that is growing by leaps and bounds. The door is open. If you're doing decent research, you can get attention. You can get you can get published in a good journal. It reminds us again that we're not terribly theory driven. We'd like to believe that we're still in this myth. The biggest myth about entrepreneurs is this, that they are born, that there's something in our DNA, there's something in the essence of our being that makes us entrepreneurial. And the reality is that that's simply not true. Yes, that the heritability coefficient from those twin studies suggests that there is some heritability, there is some nature, not nurture, in self-employment, but fundamentally, how do we start getting at that deep level? And one of the things that's going to happening is, it's sort of a bit of a spoiler alert, that there are things coming forward that in the Netherlands and now in the UK, they are mandating rigorous teacher training for management scholars. You're going to teach a class, you're going to need 250 solid hours of education, theory, and practice. Now, I'm a little bit biased on this because when I was living in Montana, that I went through 250 hours of teacher training, and I was blown away by what I learned. That what the average school teacher knows in your local high school, local secondary school, is staggering. And there are two things that we can use to forth. And if you want to change the mindset, we need that kind of strong educational. Great. I'm going to, in a couple slides, I'm going to talk about Epic that I've mentioned already. This is a very cool tool that allows you to assess the impact. Now, one of the things that we have webinars that are going to be coming ahead. One we're going to do on Epic. We've been asked, my friends and I have been asked to pursue a training program, and apparently they're calling us the renegades, or that we're the troublemakers, because people are highly resistant to this. But if anyone can do great entrepreneurship education, it's got to be us. That entrepreneurship educators have a gold mine of our own opportunities to make a difference. And I'm looking forward to a webinar that we're still arguing about, a webinar series on theory. Because once we found that people who are educators, everybody's got their theory that they prefer. So one of the things that if we're doing this live, that the start of all the OECD things is a white paper that we did at a conference where we brought together the best primary and secondary educators in entrepreneurship in Europe, in fact, in the world, which was absolutely marvelous. And if you're interested in that, there's a delightful discussion to be had here. But one of the things I tend to do in live action, if there are a lot of people in the chat, we could say, all right, a great question to get you started down this road is, how would you know someone had the entrepreneurial mindset if you never saw them with a business? You didn't see them in economic activity of any kind, just you saw them on the street, you saw them in real life. What would be something that would tell you, yes, she thinks like an entrepreneur. He thinks like a great entrepreneur. And this is a very interesting discussion because it helps us to get at those deeper levels of the mind, those deep cognitive structures that lay beneath entrepreneurial intention and action. And it's for each of these facets of the mindset that almost all of them, we have a scale, that we have something, a scientific scale that we can actually measure that. So if we were going to be in that, I put the slide in case we had a large audience in Zoom. But I want something for you to be thinking about. And one of the things is you can ask entrepreneurs, you can ask students, you can ask policymakers, and again, get a sense of what they think, their mental model of what entrepreneurship is. And I highly recommend people doing it. Now, I'm going to sort of jump in the deep end here, that the scales that I use for the mindset that reflect these facets, for instance, that Seligman's learned optimism is an incredibly powerful measure of how resilient we are to adversity. It has incredible predictive validity, and it is not a very long scale. So it ticks all the boxes of a great research tool. There are people who don't like it because they don't like its message. But if you're familiar with that, this really kicked off the whole positive psychology mode 30 years ago. And I've used it in research and used this in community development. It's a powerful tool. And being resilient to adversity is something that we really need to be aware of in these terrible pandemic times. There's a scale called GRIT, which has interesting, like our persistent at goal-directed behavior. The only problem is that almost all the studies of entrepreneurs is, you think grit is who they are. This is the key to entrepreneurial success, is being stubbornly persistent. And it turns out, especially with growth entrepreneur samples, to have no impact, have no relationship, or is a negative predictor. So think about why that might be. Is yes, it's important to be persistent in a course of action, but you also need to recognize when things are going wrong and pivoting. That you need to be able to pivot. And the last scale at the bottom, cognitive flexibility, appears to be what's really important. Are you able to shift gears? And more important, can you connect the dots in your head differently when things aren't quite working out? And that's very exciting. Not just because I score really high on the scale myself, that I score higher in that than on grit, or sadly higher than on optimism. But there are other things. Entrepreneurs are action-oriented. There's a great scale by the marvelous German psychologist Julius Kuhl that is not too long a scale that it's been. I've had some great success. There are actually, you end up with more scales than this, but I wanted to sort of give an idea of the possibilities. If you see something that could reflect a facet of the entrepreneurial mindset, it is worth testing. You can try it on students. Is that scale? Are they getting better when they take the class? How do the entrepreneurs in your community score on those? And it gives you a sense. The last one I did the talk yesterday, and one of the other speakers was talking about how communities have kind of a personality. That in some communities, the people in that community will score higher on some of these scales than others, consistently in a statistically significant way. What does that community look like in these terms, and what are the implications for the type of business you have? Again, I think this is a whole lot of fun. You get to use good theory, sometimes great theory, and with proven tools. It's a lot easier to do good research if you do that. So here's sort of my basic model I've basically stolen this model from the education folks. But if you think about what is the entrepreneurial mindset at any level, is we're trying to move from thinking more like a novice to moving toward an expert. Or I should like it that way, given the screen. That, what does that mean exactly? These deep cognitive structures, that represent the facets of the mindset. Where do they come from? Now, in education, there's always a component of changing what learners know. But we're also changing how they know it, how they structure that knowledge. You can't get from novice to expert with content alone. However, we have most of our efforts really focuses how much stuff did the kids learn? How much stuff did our trainees in the incubator learn? And we're not very good at asking the right questions about what it is they should learn. And this is another area for the myths and misconceptions, is how many myths, what do people get wrong, and how do we fix it? Because an expert need not know a whole lot more than the novice. But what she knows, what he knows, what they know is closer to reality, that they aren't as likely to fall for the myths and misconceptions. And we've, in our practice, we've researched it and said, well, You don't have to study your competition. You just have to fill out the business model canvas, do some lean startup stuff, and maybe brainstorm some design thinking. And we have thrown, in some cases, thrown the baby out with the bathwater, which drives the investors crazy. But the thinking about what I think about in terms of how education moves, how people move forward is, if we're going to change those knowledge structures, as you can see, it's sort of in the middle, lower middle of this diagram, is what that requires are changes in these deep anchoring beliefs, these deep assumptions that we have about the world. So what changes those? And these are, this is what we really mean when we say experiential learning. Is that it's not experience if it doesn't change you. If it isn't changing you at a deep level, it is not experiential learning. It may be hands-on, but it's not experiential. And breaking that down, these what I call critical developmental experiences, is what are the when people change their deep belief, they learned a lesson from something. So what is an experience that they can have that will change that? For instance, what would make someone more action-oriented? To believe that they should have a bias for action. What kind of exercises are we using in the classroom, that we're using in the incubator accelerator, that we're trying to nurture with policy? Okay, this gives us something we can talk about. You can talk to the entrepreneurs, you can talk to the people running the incubators and accelerators. What is it that you're trying to generate? But we're not very good at testing it, partly because we're scared that we might find we're not doing very much. But that's okay. That's okay. That eventually there will be an aha moment with this. So I would recommend, as both a research projects or as policy initiatives, is try to identify what those critical developmental beliefs, experiences are that change our deep beliefs. There are a lot of things like, wow, that was great fun we did in the class, or we did this really cool thing down at the accelerator. Did it really make a difference? And there's again, much longer discussion about that, having the right kind of mentoring. And ultimately it's about reflection, which I found, at least in North America, the students hate doing reflection. But partly because it's painful, because it's where you realize your knowledge structure needs to change. But it's a great thing to study. And I recommend highly. And anybody who's interested in pursuing this, I am all ears. I think the only way we're going to capture this is to be as international as possible, with as many people as possible looking at this. And this is something I leave you the link is, this is from the International Council of Small Business, has inspired it. If you're looking for an academic home, ICSB is a great one. The Academy of Management has an entrepreneurship vision that I recommend both highly. But what is ICSB's leader challenged me with this question is, what do we owe our learners? That we're supposed to be an educator. What is it that we need to do? And again, this is an hour topic in itself. But we had some pedagogies are better than others, and sometimes they're better for different individuals. Have different kinds of pedagogies that work best for them. And in a sense, that pedagogy is kind of maybe more mechanical, that ultimately you want to be. It's something called hudagogy, which is a fancy Greek word for saying self-directed learning. And no matter what facet of life you're in, the capacity and the desire for self-directed learning is incredibly powerful. It goes far beyond entrepreneurship. And it is something that we can help nurture in other people. That we need, the class, if we're going to train entrepreneurs, we need to have the best educators, people who are actually trained, expert educators. That we have to have the right learning settings, the best ecosystem to support. There's an entrepreneurial ecosystem, an entrepreneurial education ecosystem that supports what we're trying to do, and that has not been terribly well researched. That we need to do much better academic research on entrepreneurship education, the impact, the kind of things we've been talking about, which ultimately means the best assessment, which we'll talk about in a second. These are all things. The bad news on all 6 of these is we have not made a whole lot of progress. Surprisingly little progress on all of these. The good news is we can get a lot better pretty darn fast in each of these. It's something that we can move forward. And I would urge you that you're in your communities is to be thinking about all of these components. It's not just enough to do a clever pedagogy. Oh, okay, we're have a really fun exercise in design thinking, which is great. But if you don't have the educators, if you don't have the support, it's not going to. It may not become a critical developmental experience. So I'm excited about that. And so anyway, the link is there. I hope you had a chance to scribble it down. That it was kind of a hand grenade to throw out there. The funny thing is, I got lots of messages when I first did this earlier this year. Things like, I hate you, Norris. I read this and I hate you, but you're right. And then they laughed. And a few of them said, okay, let's get busy on trying to move these forward. Because again, I think in all the business school stuff, we are the one arena where we really can change the mindset. We really can change how people think at a deep level. We just need to work at it a little bit differently. Assessment has become incredibly an issue during the pandemic because if you're in a business school and you're dealing with one of the accrediting bodies like the AACSB or EQUIS, they have already challenged business schools to demonstrate the impact they have on the world. And assessing the impact on the students is going to be, in the next few years, is going to be center stage. And again, who better to demonstrate that we're moving the needle than in entrepreneurship? But it's coming. And yes, it's useful for developing your program, whether you're developing an incubator program or you're developing an entrepreneurship class. This is pretty exciting stuff. So what you assess really depends on what it is you're trying to change. And this has been one of the, are you trying to change their action orientation? Are you trying to make them more resilient to adversity? Are you teaching them to get better at connecting the dots, to be cognitively flexible? And again, this global research project is in the middle of forming, and you are all invited to participate. I love EPIC. If you can see in the upper left, that really long acronym that was the program manager cleverly designed because it's sort of, it meets all the government bureaucracy, long tortured acronym, but the only way to pronounce it is EPIC. And that was a lot of fun until the European Union Director General said, well, what does EPIC stand for? So our poor program manager had to, in an hour, figure out what the acronym is. She came up with a good one. But if you go to heinnovate.eu, there are a whole bunch of tools. And if you're involved at all with education, I recommend going there because they have a whole bunch of tools that are useful. But this one called EPIC. And the whole point of EPIC was we're going to assess different facets of the essence of entrepreneurship. I would, do we change what people know? Yes, that's a hard one to measure rigorously. But we also have the mindset, and I accidentally deleted the link there for mindset. Sorry. That it's okay, not just what you know, but how you think. That the skills, what do you know how to do? There's something called EntreComp, which is an incredible multinational effort to identify a core set of entrepreneurial skills. There's 15 of them, and there's under each of them there are facets of those that number in the hundreds. But it's been a glorious effort, and I definitely recommend looking at that. That it's okay what you know, what do you know how to do, how do you think, but ultimately it's about behavior. What is an entrepreneurial behavior? What does that mean exactly? It's not just starting a business. For a lot of business schools, they go, okay, how many of our students went out and started a business? May not be a great question, because some of our very best students have really nice job offers that pay really well in exciting industries. You can't, that they're not going to start a business till later, or they're going to use that entrepreneurial thinking and knowledge and behavior in large organizations, that even in government. And that's very much kind of behavior we want to capture. Are they simply the students deeply getting more and deeply engaged in the local entrepreneurial ecosystem? Are they being helpful? Are they becoming mentors themselves? A lot of things that we need to look at. And we also, one of the things that came out in the EPIC project is understanding that most schools don't know what their stakeholders really want. That what is it that the people who give you money want to, where do they want you to move the needle? You at least need to ask that question. Anyway, the EPIC tool captures multiple facets of this. I'm very happy to, if you're interested, engaged in a project where we can look at a lot of schools in a lot of countries. We'd love to have you involved. Right. So let's switch gears to the macro level, the ecosystem level. We know in the field that it's bottom up, that it's led by the voice of the entrepreneur, not the voice of the so-called experts. It's about the networks. That ecosystems are not linear, they're non-linear, they're complex adaptive systems. So the math is very different in studying them. And we've done a terrible job on that front. But I'm looking for it. But one example is that it is the rare university that is wildly successful at tech transfer. If you are familiar with open innovation, we tend to not do that. And it's hard for various legal and bureaucratic and political reasons. But again, it's something for us to be thinking about. I'm sorry. The building is shaking here, and it's not an earthquake. I have no idea what's up. ESHIP, ESHIP, is not an acronym. It's just a term for a program by the giant Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, the largest foundation in the world supporting entrepreneurship programming, has committed very deeply to supporting building ecosystems as a profession. And I've been blessed with working with hundreds of absolutely amazing people from around the country, around the world, that are themselves moving the needle and growing their local communities. I would be eager to have a longer conversation about that. I would be eager to get you involved because this is the practitioner side. There are very few academics in it, but there are lots, no shortage of policy people and lots of people who are on the ground trying to grow. So think of it in terms of, instead of helping entrepreneurs, helping the people who help the entrepreneurs, if that makes sense. Anyway, I would love to connect you. There's some projects that are moving ahead on that said B2 Rogue, long story behind the name, but the Team Rogue has a bunch of very interesting project ideas in various stages of development that they would welcome any of you to get involved. So looking at the sort of the myths and misconceptions and the research topics that really touch on that is about the governance of an ecosystem. Who has more influence, has too much influence, who has too little. Again, this model, if it's a top-down triple helix sort of thing, governance looks very different than if it's bottom-up. And one reason that have not made headway is, like many of our entrepreneur friends, they're not necessarily very good at identifying all of the stakeholders in this complex web of ecosystems. You know, who are the people that you should be talking to? Can you help create the value proposition for them? And if that's true for entrepreneurs, it is true for us in growing ecosystems. Who are the players? Why would they love us? Why would they hate us? Why would they want to kill us? Why would they want to actually help us? And I had mentioned before this notion of the micro foundations. The individual of the mindset matters, that different communities do have different and essentially different personalities of this. And culture is something we talk about, but we don't really measure. And what does that really mean? And a lot of it is, okay, you want a culture in an organization or a community where it's safe to experiment, safe to fail and learn from the failure. And we all say, that's what we're doing. And we're almost not doing that, rarely doing that. So what is that, you know, what does a safe space for entrepreneurs look like? Anyway, I had mentioned there are several things coming down the road that if you're interested to get involved in, whether it's an audience or maybe even as a participant, is these projects from that eShip are doing, because it's they're all in very high leverage areas that will go a long way to dispelling the myths and misconceptions people have about how to grow entrepreneurs, and some webinars that I look forward to sharing with you guys down the road. Kind of the last sort of important area is methodology. One of the most frightening things I'm sorry, Dr. Das, you asked a great question. I'm going to come back to that because I think that's really on point. But we'll be back to that when we're done here. One of the things that in management scholars find, and I don't know if it's true where you are, but certainly in North America, the economists make fun of the management scholars because all our models are additive, and they understand that a multiplicative model is actually makes sense. Even though they almost always yield exactly the same response, it makes, to them, it makes more intuitive sense. And every time someone for instance, the intentions model, that intent is a linear function of your perception that the behavior is desirable and the perception that it is desirable, that is feasible. And a scholar in Scandinavia a few years ago changed it to a multiplicative model, was marvelous, brilliant, and the reviewers hated it. He had great difficulty getting it published because too many of the reviewers and editors simply don't get that. So I'm sorry I waited so long to give you this warning, but if you're doing cutting edge work in any field, the reviewers and editors may need to be educated on what you're doing. I've written some papers that I thought were marvelous and the reviewers just crapped all over them. It's not that they didn't get it, it's that they, given their own deep assumptions about research, failed. There are prominent entrepreneurship journals that up until fairly recently refused any qualitative studies. I mean, it was bad enough that they didn't want theory papers. No, we don't, we don't need any of that stinking theory. We just want cool results. And that has changed, and in fact, changed dramatically in the last couple of years. So if that intrigues you, let's have a conversation about how to move forward. I make my colleagues very angry when I say, well, let's get rid of structural equation modeling. It's a great tool, but it's also a crutch that if you can't understand the math behind it, you probably shouldn't be using it. People get very upset with it. But it's so cool. God, that understanding it. So the thing in the middle, I've become very enamored. This is what I'm studying right now. Is even at my advanced age, is using graph theory and using graph databases like Neo4j are doing powerful things. I don't know if you saw the news about the Pandora papers, that 12 million documents about the offshore banking in the world. And how do you wade through 12 million documents? Well, there's a prior one called the Panama Papers. There's only like 10 million documents. And by using a graph database, they were able to sort through and trace who's connected to who and doing what when. And really in a lot less time than it took for the data entry. If they had used a conventional database, they'd still be analyzing the Panama Papers from 4 or 5 years ago. Instead, we're getting analysis of this new set, the Pandora Papers. Basically, they could get an output in a day instead of a couple of years. It's a little hard to explain, but I recommend if you're interested in making a methodological contribution to the field, that I think that's going to be the big winner. If I can get this to move forward here. Oops. Trying to. And as a bonus to this talk, is that there are a lot of universities in North America that are struggling. They've lost a lot of money. Their revenues have been deeply slashed and are going to stay slashed for years. We're in this new world where there's online and hybrid courses. Students are not paying rent at the dorms and such. But the schools that are reinventing themselves along these lines have been doing the great rethink, have certainly become successful. And one of the things that this webinar is an example of is that what Odisha Kart is doing, that it's not about creating new content anymore. There are people going to still do that, but if you're going to be successful as an educator, whether it's in a university setting, in a high school, or in an accelerator, is curating the very best content that's out there. I know a lot about creativity, but if I designed a creativity class, it'd be about this much Norris, and it'd be mostly taking advantage of the incredible experts that are out there. So one thing that's already started to happen is if your school or your program is not one of the top 5 or 10 in the world, how you're going to get there is by this curating. Okay, I'm interested in entrepreneurial creativity. Okay, who are the 5 best people in the world? Connect with them, use their material, even get them involved. And you'll not only have a brilliant course, you'll have a huge competitive advantage over. And the pushback in North America is, well, no, it's got to be our stuff. That they feel very territorial, very proprietary. And it's as if they don't really want what's best for the learners. They don't really believe that because they genuinely believe they need to be the ones doing it. But again, if you're doing programs, any kind of training, whatever, there are so many great tools out there. And one nice thing you can do is this audience can do collectively is talk about, okay, how can we work together? How can we learn from each other? One thing I do with students, there's something e-corner, educators corner at Stanford's Technology Ventures Program, stvp.org. It is an insane collection of exercises, of videos, you name it, and simply asking the students to go through and find stuff that speaks to them. And it's marvelous in a lot of ways, because there's a famous person, Guy Kawasaki, he's been giving talks about entrepreneurship, growing entrepreneurs for 20 years. And it's kind of the same talk, but there's like 11 different versions of his talk as he had, but you can see how his own thinking has evolved, how our collective thinking has evolved. But the nice thing is, if you get good at the curating, that's going to give you more time to engage and work with the community. It's going to give you more time for research and maybe even hang out with your family. I spend a lot of time taking the dog for a walk myself. That's been a blessing. So where do we start? There's a link there about the wish list is, I was challenged recently, what are all the things that you wish people were studying? And I would love to share that list. It ended up being a longer list than I expected, but it has galvanized me to keep moving forward. Anyway, that I usually end my talks with, we actually have a discussion of where I screwed up. What did I do? What did I get wrong? What did I forget to talk about from their perspective? And we don't really have that opportunity, but let me see if I can. That Dr. Das asked a great question in the chat, and I'd like to take a little time. He was talking about tribalism. Let's see. I'm trying to get this thing to tell me trying to figure out where the chat is and all this. This is giving me a lot of grief here. Is Dr. Das on the Zoom call? If so, could you unmute yourself and ask the question directly?
Okay, sir. For now, I'd like to invite Professor B.C. Das for a quick comment. Then we'll go to another session that is called question and answer session.
Always good to end on an audience question.
Namaskar, esteemed speaker and director card. I was talking about the most weaker section of the society of the world. I think India is having the largest tribal population next to Africa. So we are very much concerned at national level and state level for policy framing regarding tribal upliftment, tribal empowerment. So my question, what I read that these tribal groups, more than 500 tribal groups are residing in India. India's different regions having different ecosystems. Their living patterns are conditioned to these ecosystems. Once upon a time during 1964, when during 1950s, India was planning to keep these tribals in a national park approach. But our first Prime Minister was disagree with the ideas of Barrier Elvin, the then tribal advisor to Government of India. Nehru said that tribals need to develop themselves, and this is the prime responsibility of national government to bring the tribal groups to mainstream. So we have to cough up a bunch of programs, development programs for them, and in this way we can bring the development agenda to center stage for their upliftment. So this was the policy decision. But sir, my point to raise here regarding entrepreneurship education, do you think, sir, specific entrepreneurship education is required for their life, or to enhance the quality of life among tribals? Sir, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for giving me sort of the political background, because that we find even in Silicon Valley and in Amsterdam and other places that are maybe booming, is that sort of the culture, the political context of economic development, of the community development, can make certain things very easy and some things very hard. And unfortunately, it's the things we need to do that are going to be very hard. The short answer is that there is much in entrepreneurship education that applies everywhere, that we can adapt these tools. But that means we need, if you're going to adapt a tool, let's say the business model canvas, that if the instructions are in English and they don't speak English, this is obviously a problem. That you need someone to translate and to do the adapting, who understands the community at a very deep level. That you've got people in the community who, no matter what tribal group you look at, there are people they're trying to develop small businesses. They're trying to develop new businesses, and you need to make allies of them. And one of the things that also helps in adapting, and this is going to make me stand things on its head, but my great host mentioned my mantra is students are our secret weapon. In North America, these ecosystem builders at ESHEP, talking to a couple hundred of them, they all hate their local university. When I ask them about the university, we hate them, they're useless. And almost all of them volunteered without my asking, but we love the students. The students are the ultimate boundary spanner. And a lot of these things is empowering, giving some basic tools. There are certain things, exercises that provide critical development experiences that are going to be pretty much everywhere. But adapting them and understanding to the community this has got to be the community doing it, not some expert. In English, we say, don't be the sage on the stage, be the guide on the side. It's very corny and cliche, but it's still very, very, very much true. Is for each that you need, is to engage these communities, because every community is going to have a different personality in terms of how they're proceeding with economic and community development. That in Texas, Dallas and Fort Worth are two large cities right next to each other, and they're very different. There are two cities in China, unfortunately, they're kind of near Wuhan, but having other problems. But that in one community, they instituted, the Chinese government kind of bullied them into doing this bottom up, that we're going to let the entrepreneurs decide. That, and in the next door of the community, the only thing that worked was the top down bureaucratic approach. They both worked. Bottom up worked better and faster, cheaper, but is it different personalities of these communities? So be thinking about who are engaged. If you're going into these communities, engaging the people who are already doing this. And yes, maybe if they're doing what they're doing, they're doing a terrible job of entrepreneurial development, but at least they care about it. And that makes a great leverage point. And saying each of these communities is get the students involved. One thing that I have students do is kind of do a deep dive in their own local ecosystem and find out what surprises them. There are a lot, because of this global world, this virtual world we live in, there are a lot of resources out there, but what resources matter most to that community? But say ultimately that there's a cliche about leadership, or the punchline is the best leader is one where the followers know that they did it themselves. And this is a chance for, the entrepreneurs, both present and future, in those tribal communities to become the leaders. And if we have any luck at all, we can learn from each of them. You've got 500 groups there. What are the cool differences between these tribes, so we can share it with other people and we can learn for themselves. You're going to develop entrepreneurs by having a council of grand poobahs. All the very important people in your community, they're probably not going to make the difference that a group of passionate entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial people, including students, they'll make the difference. And I'm happy to have a longer conversation. So thank you for the brilliant question, and thank you for the detailed background on that, Professor Das. And the director is looking
Thank
like,
you.
Norris, shut up.
Yes. Thank you, Norris. Such a very wonderful deliberation you had. And I gone through entire your presentation with, special thank you. And I will have just 3 questions for you. If you allow me to ask, your time permits. Okay, thank you.
I'm good.
Sir, tell me why these these management institutions, right, in MIT, in Harvard, or any management institutions, why they cannot produce best minds, particular entrepreneurship? If you look, Bill Gates, then Elon Musk, then Warren Buffett, they are not the trained minds from any management institutions. What is your ideas on that?
Well, Bill did go to Harvard for a while. Is that they're all very self-taught. That they have this self-directed learning is something that we all do all the time in our daily lives. We're learning stuff all the time, and we don't think of that as learning because of that. What it is that they are. I met a guy who at the Mother Group in Africa. He is family was from India, but now Dubai, one of these global guys, and he did not finish. Actually, like I did not finish high school, but he has read more great English literature than I have. So one of the things is that are people, simply looking, are there people, you're going online to look at cute videos of kittens, to go on Twitter and yell at people, or are you actually learning things? That as a scholar in particular, I don't read any article that somebody didn't recommend to me on LinkedIn or Twitter or Facebook. They said, Norris, you got to read this. And I'm blessed that I was raised to take advantage of that. We don't always have it. But in terms of the program, they are turning out, a lot of them are turning out great folks, but they're still ultimately, their market, is, especially business schools, their market is middle management in large corporations. I mean, and you hope they do more, but that's who's hiring, hiring our students is, so it's not, what you hope to do is to plant. My mentor, Al Shapiro at Ohio State, said we're creating time bombs, that we're going to give them the tools that when the right time comes, they're going to step up. I mean, and sometimes it hits sooner, like with Bill Gates, and sometimes it's later, as in Warren Buffett. That I'm not sure I'm answering I hope I'm answering your question, is that you don't need, yes, it's true, you don't need a high-level university education to be a great entrepreneur, or to be a great person for that matter. But the more that universities can do to help build people who think and act like entrepreneurs, that they're innovative, that they are willing to be disruptive. It's still worth looking at that. But maybe, the key isn't to say the universities, but let's start as young as possible. There's the Udiham Foundation in New Delhi, Meka Maheshwari and his friends. They have a very simple entrepreneurial mindset building exercise that they have spread out to hundreds of thousands of school kids, mostly in disadvantaged areas. That I recommend looking that up. It's very cool. They claim they're using some of my stuff, but it's in Hindi, and my Hindi is non-existent. But I'm honored to be able to play a tiny role in that. But let's start them young. Director sort of, I have a great story from the giant country of Wales in the United Kingdom. And my friends were sitting there. They were training kids all the way, starting with kindergarten, teaching them about entrepreneurship and innovation. And these kids, they're in the 3rd grade, running around the playground at recess, as kids do. And they're saying, what do we play? What do we play? And one of the kids said, let's play entrepreneur. And the other kids, yes. And I'm sitting there, and my friend is telling me, as I have tears running down my face of like, one, how cool it is, and why didn't I have a school like that? So, university's job is to create great people, great citizens, and that yes, we want to train them for careers, but it's just about what we're talking about, why we need to, the entrepreneurial mindset, entrepreneurial skills, entrepreneurial behavior. That's what we need. Does that help at all? You're looking at me like,
Yes.
Sometimes I kind of become like a politician and I answer the question I want to answer.
Okay. No issues, sir. Fine.
Okay, second question.
Yeah. Sir, your sum of slides told me to ask this question. When you talked about this government and community, right? You are linked with this governance and policy and entrepreneurship and what you call it in terms of future perspective and pandemic, all these things. Tell me frankly, how many B schools are producing your best minds and always with trained and educated minds? They are creating a lot of troubles for these communities, because when you go to invest some huge money, then you need much lands. The lands, instead of how to snatch from these communities fast. Do you think this community and the best minds should be serve the communities fast? What is your ideas?
Well, I'm not sure I understand the question. What I think you're asking is, should the universities be helping improve their communities?
Yeah, improve the community.
Well,
and I am asking about how many best minds, or say trained minds or educated minds, can they save their community's problems? Can they share, and they must be solved to the communities first? What actually they have facing problems due to industrialization, due to land acquisition, due to displacement?
Okay, if I understand the question, it's that there's the notion of the ivory tower, which used to be a compliment, that universities were this shining beacon at the top of the hill and shining out knowledge and important information to their communities. But if you're a business person, entrepreneur, that there's a difference between a product orientation and a market orientation. Universities are inherently endemically prone to this product orientation. We have these cool ideas, and whereas we really need to be reaching out to our external stakeholders in the community. If I'm a university, then I want to talk to the entrepreneurs. What is it that they want? I had great fun about a year and a half ago, as the pandemic was starting, is we were going to survey the entrepreneurs in our community, and I sort of bet them what are the top 10 things that they would like, they want to do. And I guessed 8 of them in advance. I said, well, we should have just asked. He was like, no, you have to ask them. And it's a mindset shift, a different kind of mindset shift, that embracing what is it the communities want. When I was at Boise State, they had a new president, and he said, we're going to have an economic development task force. And this committee of professors went down to our city hall, which is only half a mile away. And I got calls from 3 different people at City Hall going, who are these assholes? It's people who knew nothing about the topic were insisting that they were the experts and they were going to tell the peasants what to do. I'm being a little harsh here, but the reality is that the stakeholders that the universities see aren't the stakeholders they probably should be talking to. Now, in my state, the latest is the universities have angered the state legislature, the people with the money. Not very smart, I don't think, but they can be clueless. But I would say again, is if I were working there now, I would not be sending, I would be trying to listen. I would try to get my colleagues to listen, but the key leverage everywhere I've gone, it's been the students. That the students are going out and given the slightest encouragement, they're going to go out and go to the entrepreneur meetups, go to the tech meetups. They're going to go talk to the civic officials and find out there are perfect boundary spanners. And universities that encourage that are going to make a difference. Universities that don't encourage it, don't reward that behavior, are going to continue to not really be very helpful in their community. So listen, hear what the entrepreneurs are saying. What is it that we can do for them? What's the value proposition for them, not the value proposition for us? And when in doubt, send the students out into the community, because they're going to do it anyway. They're going to do it anyway, and might as well, make them a powerful lever in community development. I'm so excited. I realize, thinking back, that the best stuff I ever did in school wasn't quantum physics. It was making a difference in the community. If that helps, question 3. You're looking at me like,
yes, sir.
Did you answer the question?
Yes. The third one, sir, tell me frankly, what would you suggest to overcome this pandemic situation, for the best suggestions for entrepreneurs across the globe? And tell me, if you give some money to your students, they will go for entrepreneurship or they will go for service?
Well, it is in a lot of ways service learning, the best service learning in students. There are a lot of universities in North America where the freshman, you're a new student, a freshman at the university, that you do a service learning project to help the community. And a lot of times it's just kind of dumb. I mean, it doesn't really help. It's something for the students to do, or it's very politically motivated. That if it's done well, it is providing its own critical developmental experiences for that. What are the lessons we want students to take away? And a lot of it is, if I were running a service learning program at a university, is that to go out, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but that what is it that the community wants, as opposed to what we experts think they need. And if you can, and it's hard because I'm a real smart guy. I've been very experienced at all this, and I know what they should be doing. And half the time I'm wrong. You gotta, go out and listen to those different stakeholders, and engaging the students in that fashion, I think, is absolutely critical. Universities want to make a difference. This is how they do it. It may run contrary to ideology. It may run contrary to their own philosophical beliefs. That it's a bit of a challenge. Of course, I went to grad school at Ohio State, where the most important impact that they can have is have a great football team, great sports teams. But that's how they cleverly at Ohio State. Yes, they have, national champion level American football and basketball and other sports, but they use that as an entree, as a lever to engage the community and get them talking about what is it we can do to help you, as opposed to the university saying, here's what we do. We don't really care what you want because we're the smart guys, we know more. No. Growing up, I was the smartest person I knew. Then I got to Caltech and I was the village idiot in many ways. Is realizing no matter how smart you are, you ain't that smart, that you still have to listen to people. And I think that's it's hard for bureaucracies to do, and universities are always credible bureaucracies. And then you layer in all the massive egos of the people there, it can get pretty sticky. That director, we had an online conference a couple of years ago where the top entrepreneurship educators in the world are in the same. Imagine 20 of the top 30 entrepreneurship educators in the world all on the same Zoom call. And we actually brainstormed what would be one thing that would tell you have a great entrepreneurship program, that you're making a difference in the community. And it is your president, university president or rector or your dean wakes up in the middle of the night going, oh my God, what are those damned entrepreneurship people doing? That it is an inherently disruptive, even subversive activity. But if you can embrace that and you start making, I had an experience at Boise State where we have some very important guests, grand poobahs from the community there, and I did one of these, sort of obnoxious things. And the guy wrote a check to the university on the spot. Students thought that was that was amazing, because your external your stakeholders, the people in the community, see the world very differently than universities do, and that can be a good thing. You're trying to create knowledge. You're trying to disseminate knowledge. At the same time, you have to, it's like an educator has to care about the students, not just what it is she is trying to teach. I hope that helps. I may have completely misunderstood the question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. I would like to invite Dr. Gitanjali Mahanti, if you have any question, please. Dr. Gitanjali Mahanti.
I guess I can.
Yeah. Dr. Mahanti, if you have any question, you can ask directly. No questions. Thank you, sir. And Mr. Shubham Das. Thank you so much, sir. There is no question from the audience side. Now I'd like to invite Professor Rudhunan Das go for a formal vote of thanks. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a joy to have this conversation, and I would ask people in the audience, please stay in touch. Connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Whatever it takes. I would love to figure out how to move things forward. And again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share with you all. And I will see you down the road. And
sure, sir. Sure, sir.
Go,
Sir,
go,
it's
go.
yeah, it's our privilege also, sir, to got you in this world's largest running webinar called World Human Science and Management Conference. And I know you are the one of the best mind of the globe for the side of entrepreneurship and what we call it, the research and entrepreneur and serve humanity. Thank you so much, sir. And namaste from India,
Well,
sir.
my is that I learn something new every day. And I do a lot of these calls and I learn something every day. So thank you. And I will, I'm going to go take a nap because I have I have 2 more meetings today. And I had one that finished at 1 a.m. and then I had to be up at 6 a.m. for you guys. So I'm excited and I'm so glad to have this conversation and I wish you all the best and I remain at your service.
Thank you so much.
And I'll see you later. And sorry
Bye-bye,
that the sun is coming up behind me. So
okay, no issue, sir. Thank you.
I look like I'm
Sir, we are Indians. We can adjust everything, sir. No issue. Thank you so much, sir.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, sir.
Thank you so much, Professor Norris, for your wonderful and thought-provoking deliberation today. And now we have to be gone through to conclude the session. I would like to thank our coordinating institutes, Ravenshaw University, Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, and Central University of Odisha, Koraput, and all the directors, vice chancellors, conveners, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda and Professor Charudat Panigrahi for their cooperation and support. Our coordinator and our guide today, Dr. B.C. Das from Ravenshaw University, and respected Director, Center for Adivasi Research and Development for their cooperation and organizing such type of wonderful webinars, and respected dignitaries over here, and our team, Mr. Shubham Das, Dr. Nupur Patnaik, Dr. Gurudev Meher, Dr. Ghanshyam Giri, Dr. Kamal Prasad Mohanty, Dr. Samuel Lima, Dr. Chinmay Kumar Sahu for their cooperation to organizing such kind of programs and connecting global audience, and definitely it was a very good experience to listen several kind of peoples in different fields. Thank you so much, Dr. Jena, for organizing such kind of programs. Thank you all.